Because, it's one thing to say, oh, Mamdani, he's just this sort of wacky guy in New York. But this does seem to be the direction that the Democrats are taking in a lot of cities. And one person I want to bring to everyone's attention is another person called Omar Fateh. Now, he's the Democrat mayoral candidate for Minneapolis. He's doing all of his standing up to the president stuff, doesn't want the police to work with ICE. But he's also had some comments about who the real threat to peace is in America. Now, have a look at this.
You want to know who the real threat is, Madam President? I'll give you a hint. They don't look like our chief author. They don't look like the folks up in the gallery. They don't look like the folks on the rotunda. They look like many of the members that sit in the front. And you don't have to take my word for it. According to DHS, Madam President, the greatest domestic threat facing the United States comes from, quote, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race, not our immigrants.
So if you listen to what he's saying there, basically, Joe, he's saying the real domestic threat in the United States is white people. I'm not quite sure that's going to go over well in middle America.
It will in Minneapolis, right? So
of course.
That's the city that loves goofy Tim Walz, right, who obviously failed as a vice presidential candidate on a national level. But yeah, in middle America itself, outside of major cities like Minneapolis, like San Francisco, like Los Angeles, like Chicago and New York, that's what we're looking at now at this point. The blue cities will, I guess, elect these socialists / communists / people who hate America. And then everywhere else in the country outside of those cities will say, we reject this completely. And then on a national level, elect the Donald Trumps of the world, have a Republican Senate, have a Republican Congress. More governors are now Republican than Democrat. You have a Supreme Court that's 6-3 conservative. So I guess, yeah, you're going to lose the cities, but you're going to win the war as far as like the country itself. That's where America is headed at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, just to sort of look ahead, we're already sort of seeing people shape up their battles for the 28 Democrat presidential primary campaign. There was a poll this week that said, I couldn't believe this. Kamala Harris is actually ahead of the pack here, as well as Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, the person who was so bad at his job that people knew who the Transportation Secretary was, and, of course, California Governor Gavin Newsom. This all says to me that whatever issues the Republicans have at the moment with some of the things going on around Trump, the Democrats have a real existential crisis in that they've got nobody who's potentially appealing to the national side. Sure.
So you look at the top 3 candidates, right? 2 are from California. You have Gavin Newsom, who has to own his record in California, highest taxes in the country, highest homeless rate in the country, more people leaving California than any other state in the country. You could go on as far as like all the problems with California. Then Kamala Harris, failed vice president, failed Democratic nominee. And then your other alternative, I guess, is Pete Buttigieg, who literally took several months off for paternity leave when there was no mother to take care of the child. In other words, like, there was no reason for him to do that as transportation secretary, where the transportation system here in the United States fell apart. So if those are your top 3 choices, you've got some real problems if the Republicans run J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio on their side, and if the Trump economy is going well, and if we have peace and prosperity in places like the Middle East and so on. So, yeah, that's what 2028 is looking like. But then again, it's more than 3.5 years away. But yet, this is what we do in these shows to talk about this. But a lot can change between now and then.
Well, yeah, of course, it's never the first horse that comes out of the gate that's going to win, but 3.5 years is fairly short time in politics. Meanwhile, Joe, just want to talk about one other sort of thing that's going on here, and this is the fight between Donald Trump and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Now, of course, the big fight is about interest rates and whether they're coming down fast enough. And now the president has said he's not planning to fire Powell, but he's also apparently drafted letters, which he might issue if he does want to fire Powell. Just explain a bit more about this fight, because we're watching it in Australia and we're seeing it roil the markets a little bit here. Explain where this is all going to wind up landing.
Well, it doesn't make any sense in terms of if you're Donald Trump looking at Jerome Powell, where you had inflation above 9% under Joe Biden. It's below 3% now under Donald Trump. And Trump keeps saying, please lower interest rates so more people could buy homes here in the United States. I can tell you personally that in my house, this is supposed to be my starter house. I'm literally joining you from my home studio in my basement. And we don't want to move because interest rates are too high. And Jerome Powell will not lower them, despite the fact that every indication says that he should, and it makes you think after a while that he's acting politically instead of in the best interest of the economy. So while Trump, technically, I guess, can't fire Powell, his reign as in terms of his job as Fed chair, that ends regardless in January. So if you're Trump, you're probably just going to try to wait this out, get a Scott Bessent in there, the Treasury Secretary, and then things will be running a lot more smoothly than they are now, because Jerome Powell seems to be a day late and a dime short every time it comes to lowering inflation, especially with the Republican president in power.
I think you're right, and I think he's been trying to make some of those predictions about Trump crashing the economy come true. Scott Bessent would be an excellent choice. Joe Concha, thank you so much for your time, as always.